Marcus Chun had been the best long-range marksman in the Terran Defense Corps for 12 years. His record spoke for itself. Over 300 confirmed kills across 4 different war zones, including the brutal siege of Kepler 442b, where his precise shots had held off an entire Zephyrian assault battalion for 6 hours until reinforcements arrived. The alien commanders had learned to fear the name Ghost Shot, Marcus's call sign that had spread through enemy communications like a whispered curse. But that was before the plasma burst that changed everything. The injury happened during what should have been a routine reconnaissance mission on the contested moon of Titan 7. Marcus had been positioned on a rocky outcrop, providing overwatch for his squad as they advanced through the crystalline valleys below. The hegemony forces, a brutal alliance of 3 alien species bent on human extermination, had set up an ambush using new cloaking technology that their intelligence had failed to detect. The plasma bolt came from nowhere, a searing line of superheated gas that caught Marcus in the right shoulder and chest. The impact threw him backward, his rifle tumbling into the chasm below as emergency medical nanobots flooded his system to prevent immediate death. Through the haze of pain and shock, he managed to call in the coordinates for an orbital strike that saved his squad, but the damage was done. 3 months later, Marcus sat in the sterile white office of General Patricia Volkov, commander of the 5th Expeditionary Fleet. The medical reports lay spread across her desk like accusations. 70% nerve damage in his right arm. Chronic pain that would never fully heal. Reaction times decreased by 43%. Accuracy scores that had once been legendary now barely met minimum standards. "I'm sorry, Chen," General Volkov said, her voice carrying the weight of hard decisions made in wartime. "You're being transferred to support duties. Training recruits, maybe logistics coordination. Your combat days are over." Marcus stared at the wall behind her, where commendations and battle flags told the story of human resistance against impossible odds. "Ma'am, with respect, I can still fight. I've been practicing with my left hand. My scores are improving every day. Your left hand scores are 67% of what your right hand used to achieve," she replied, pulling up his latest range results on her holographic display. "That might have been acceptable in peacetime, but we're losing this war, Chun. Every shot has to count. Every sniper needs to be perfect. I can't justify keeping you in a combat role when there are younger, uninjured marksmen waiting for deployment." The words hit harder than the plasma bolt had. Marcus felt something break inside him that the medical nanobots couldn't repair. "I understand, ma'am. You'll be transferred to the training facility on Ceres Station. Commander Walsh is expecting you next week. You'll help prepare the next generation of snipers. It's important work. Important work." The phrase tasted like ash in his mouth as Marcus gathered his personal effects from his quarters. 12 years of service, countless lives saved through his precision and skill, and now he was being shuffled off to teach teenagers how to hold a rifle properly. The transfer to Ceres Station felt like exile. The asteroid base was a sprawling complex of training facilities, barracks, and simulation chambers carved deep into the rocky surface. It served as the primary sniper school for the Terran Defense Corps, where promising recruits learned to make impossible shots across impossible distances. Commander Walsh was a gruff man in his 60s who had lost his own leg to a hegemony landmine years earlier. He greeted Marcus with the kind of professional courtesy reserved for broken soldiers who still had something to offer. "Chen, I've read your file. Impressive record. I'm putting you in charge of advanced marksmanship training. These kids need to learn from someone who's actually faced the enemy." The recruits were younger than Marcus expected, most barely out of their teens. They looked at him with a mixture of awe and pity. Awe for his legendary reputation, pity for the obvious weakness in his right arm that he couldn't quite hide despite months of physical therapy. "So, you're the famous Ghost Shot," said recruit Taylor Morrison, a cocky young man from the Mars colonies whose attitude reminded Marcus unpleasantly of himself at that age. "Heard you used to be pretty good before you got yourself shot up." Marcus ignored the barb and began the lesson. Teaching proved harder than he had expected. These recruits had grown up with advanced targeting systems and smart ammunition that could adjust their trajectory mid-flight. They relied too heavily on technology, lacked the fundamental understanding of ballistics, and environmental factors that had made Marcus legendary. A smart bullet is only as intelligent as the person firing it, he explained during one lesson, watching as half the class struggled to hit targets at 800 meters using basic ammunition. What happens when the enemy jams your targeting computer? What happens when your smart rounds are compromised by electronic warfare? That's what backup systems are for, Morrison replied with a smirk. Besides, the war will probably be over by the time we graduate. Heard the hegemony is having supply problems. Marcus had heard differently through his contacts still serving in active units. The hegemony wasn't weakening. They were preparing for something big. Intelligence reports spoke of massive fleet movements in the outer systems, new weapons being deployed against human colonies, entire worlds going dark without explanation. But here on Ceres Station, surrounded by training simulations and theoretical exercises, the war felt distant. The recruits treated it like an adventure they might miss out on rather than the existential threat it truly was. Marcus found himself growing increasingly frustrated with their casual attitude and over-reliance on technology that could fail at the worst possible moment. 6 months into his assignment, everything changed. The emergency klaxons began wailing at 0300 hours, their piercing cry cutting through the artificial night cycle of the station. Marcus rolled out of his bunk, muscle memory from years of combat overriding the dull ache in his shoulder. The station's emergency lighting cast everything in red shadows as he pulled on his uniform and made his way to the command center. Commander Walsh was already there, his face grim as he studied the tactical displays surrounding him. The holographic map showed the local star system, with red markers indicating hostile contacts moving in perfect formation towards Ceres Station. How many? Marcus asked. 47 ships, including 3 dreadnoughts. Walsh replied without looking away from the display. They appeared on sensors 20 minutes ago. Our deep space monitoring stations never saw them coming. Stealth technology? Has to be. Something new. Walsh turned to face him, and Marcus saw fear in the older man's eyes. We've got maybe 4 hours before they reach us. The nearest fleet elements are 6 hours away, minimum. Marcus felt his blood chill. Ceres Station wasn't a military target in any strategic sense. It was a training facility filled with instructors and cadets who had never seen real combat. The defensive systems were minimal, designed more for asteroid collision prevention than repelling a major assault. What are options? He asked. Limited. We've got emergency evacuation protocols, but not enough transport ships to move everyone. Maybe half the personnel can be evacuated before they arrive. Walsh's voice grew quiet. I'm putting together volunteer teams to buy time for the evacuation. Experienced personnel only. Marcus nodded, understanding immediately. I volunteer. Chun, you're not cleared for combat duty. Your medical status dash. My medical status doesn't matter if we're all dead. Marcus interrupted. You need every experienced shooter you can get. I may not be what I used to be, but I'm still better than most. Walsh studied him for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. Report to Armory Station 3. Draw whatever equipment you think you'll need. The armory was chaos as instructors and senior personnel selected weapons and ammunition for what everyone knew was likely a suicide mission. Marcus found his way to the sniper section and began examining the available rifles. Most were training weapons, designed for safety and durability rather than maximum effectiveness. But buried in the back of the storage area, covered in dust and marked with outdated inventory tags, he found something that made his heart race. An original AM 2047 Enhanced Marksman Rifle, the same model he had used during his early combat deployments. The weapon was over 15 years old, built before the military's obsession with smart ammunition and computerized targeting systems. Marcus lifted the rifle carefully, feeling its familiar weight and balance. This was a weapon that demanded skill rather than providing it. that rewarded precision and punished mistakes without electronic forgiveness. He could work with this. He spent the next 2 hours in the station's longest firing range, reacquainting himself with the old rifle's quirks and characteristics. His right arm ached constantly, forcing him to rely more heavily on his left hand for support and fine adjustments. But gradually, his shots began finding their marks, not with his old legendary precision, but with enough accuracy to matter. The evacuation began as the enemy fleet reached the outer system. Transport ships loaded with instructors, support personnel, and most of the recruits launched in carefully spaced intervals to avoid presenting easy targets. Marcus watched from the observation deck as ship after ship disappeared into hyperspace, carrying precious human lives away from the approaching storm. Those who remained numbered less than 200, mostly combat veterans serving as instructors, along with a few dozen recruits who had volunteered to stay despite having no real combat experience. Morrison was among them, his earlier cockiness replaced by grim determination. "Thought you said the war would be over soon," Marcus said as he passed the young recruit in the corridor. Morrison had the grace to look embarrassed. "Guess I was wrong about a lot of things, sir. What do you need me to do?" Marcus studied the young man's face, seeing something there that reminded him of himself years ago. Fear mixed with determination, inexperience tempered by a willingness to learn. "Stay close to me. Do exactly what I tell you when I tell you. No questions, no arguments." "Yes, sir." The Hegemony fleet arrived exactly on schedule, their ships emerging from hyperspace in perfect formation like a school of metallic predators. The lead vessels were Zephyrian dreadnoughts, massive constructions of dark metal and glowing energy conduits that dwarfed even the largest human battleships. Behind them came a mixed force of Hegemony cruisers and destroyers, their alien designs speaking of different technologies unified under a single purpose. But it was the fourth ship type that made Marcus's blood run cold. Sleek, angular vessels that he didn't recognize from any intelligence briefing. These were something new, their hulls covered in what looked like adaptive camouflage that shifted and flowed like liquid shadow. Commander Walsh's voice echoed through the station's communication system. "All defensive teams to positions. Remember, our job isn't to win. It's to buy time for help to arrive. Every minute we hold them gives our reinforcements a better chance of saving what's left of this system." Marcus made his way to his assigned position on the station's outer ring, where maintenance airlock had been hastily converted into a firing position. The old rifle felt comfortable in his hands despite the pain in his shoulder, its simple mechanical systems a reassuring contrast to the high-tech chaos erupting around him. Through the reinforced porthole, he could see the enemy fleet beginning its approach run. The new ships, the ones he didn't recognize, were moving differently than the others, their formation fluid and organic rather than the rigid military precision of traditional Hegemony forces. Unknown contacts, changing course, came to report from the station's makeshift command center. "They're moving to surround us. Estimate 12 minutes to engagement range." Marcus adjusted his rifle's position and began calculating angles and distances. The station's rotation would affect his shots, as would the movement of the enemy vessels and the complete lack of atmospheric drag in the vacuum of space. Variables that his younger self would have processed instinctively now required conscious effort and careful consideration. Morrison crouched beside him, his own rifle trembling slightly in inexperienced hands. "Sir, what are those new ships? I've never seen anything like them in the training simulations." "Neither have I," Marcus admitted. "But whatever they are, they're about to find out what humans do when we're backed into a corner." The first energy beams reached out across space like fingers of death, striking the station's outer hull with devastating precision. Emergency systems screamed warnings as atmosphere began venting from dozens of breaches. The battle for Ceres Station had begun, and Marcus Chun was about to discover that being dismissed from active duty was the least of the Hegemony's mistakes. The first wave of enemy fire turned sections of Ceres Station into glowing metal and venting atmosphere. Marcus pressed himself against the reinforced wall of his firing position as debris scattered past the porthole like deadly confetti. The old M2047 rifle felt solid in his hands, its weight a comfort against the chaos erupting around him. "Contact!" Morrison shouted, pointing through the observation window. Small craft launching from the lead dreadnought. Marcus shifted his position to get a better angle. Through the scope of his rifle, he could see dozens of single-pilot fighters streaming from the hegemony ships like angry insects. But these weren't the clumsy assault pods they had faced in previous engagements. These new craft moved with disturbing grace, their hulls seeming to ripple and flow as they adjusted to the local environment. "Adaptive armor," he muttered, recognizing the technology from classified intelligence reports. The enemy had somehow developed materials that could shift their properties in real time, making them harder to target and more resistant to conventional weapons. The station's defensive turrets opened fire, streams of particle beams and kinetic projectiles reaching out toward the approaching fighters. Most of the shots passed harmlessly through space as the enemy craft performed maneuvers that should have been impossible for any piloted vehicle. They moved like living things anticipating attacks and flowing around defensive fire with an intelligence that felt uncomfortably organic. "Sir," Morrison's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "My targeting computer can't get a lock on any of them." Marcus wasn't surprised. The smart targeting systems that the current generation of soldiers relied on were designed to track conventional vessels, following predictable flight patterns. These new enemy fighters seemed to operate on entirely different principles, their movements too fluid and unpredictable for automated systems to follow. "Forget the computer," Marcus said, adjusting his rifle's manual sights. "Watch how they move. They're not random. There's a pattern there. See how they spiral inward? They're following gravity wells, using the station's mass to slingshot around obstacles." He tracked one of the fighters through his scope, ignoring the targeting computer's frustrated beeping as it failed to achieve lock. Instead, he relied on decades of experience, calculating trajectory and timing through instinct developed across countless battlefields. The fighter was moving in a complex spiral, but Marcus could see the underlying mathematics of its flight path. He squeezed the trigger. The old rifle kicked against his shoulder, sending a lance of coherent light across the vacuum. The beam struck the enemy fighter just as it entered a tight turnaround communications array, catching it at the precise moment when its adaptive armor was focused on protecting against the station's automated defenses. The fighter disintegrated in a brief, brilliant explosion. "Holy hell," Morrison breathed. "How did you do that?" "No computer lock, no smart ammunition, just shooting," Marcus finished. "The way snipers used to do it before we started letting machines think for us." Around the station, the battle was intensifying. More enemy fighters poured from the hegemony ships, while larger vessels moved into position for a direct assault. The station's defensive systems were taking a terrible beating, with automated turrets going silent one by one as precise enemy fire found their weak points. But Marcus was already tracking his next target, falling into a rhythm he hadn't felt in months. The pain in his shoulder faded into background noise as muscle memory and trained instinct took over. Another fighter lined up for an attack run on the station's power core, its pilot confident that human weapons couldn't track its advanced maneuvering. The second shot was even more precise than the first, catching the fighter as it decelerated to begin its attack run. The explosion lit up a section of the station's hull, but, more importantly, it sent a message to the other enemy pilots. The impossible shots weren't accidents. "Ghost shot," Morrison whispered, recognition dawning in his voice. "You're actually him. The real ghost shot." Marcus didn't respond, already acquiring his third target. But something was changing in the enemy formation. The fighters were beginning to move differently, their flight patterns becoming more erratic and unpredictable. They had noticed the precise shots coming from the station and were adapting their tactics in real time. Through the communications system, he could hear reports from other defensive positions around the station. The enemy assault was overwhelming the human defenders, despite their desperate resistance. For every enemy fighter destroyed, 3 more took its place. The station's shields were failing, life support systems were going offline, and evacuation ships were being picked off as they tried to escape the system. All stations, this is command. Commander Walsh's voice crackled through the static of damaged communications equipment. Enemy boarding craft detected on approach vector 7 Alpha. All available personnel to repel boarders. Marcus felt his stomach drop. The enemy wasn't content to simply destroy the station from a distance. They wanted to take it intact, which meant they were planning to capture prisoners. In hegemony hands, the knowledge and personnel of humanity's premier sniper school would be invaluable for developing countermeasures against human marksmen. "Morrison, we need to move," he said, already breaking down his rifle for transport. "They're coming aboard." The young recruit looked confused. "Sir, shouldn't we stay here? Keep shooting at the fighters." "The fighters are a distraction now," Marcus explained, securing his equipment. "The real threat is the boarding parties. They'll have heavy armor, close combat weapons, and they'll be looking for high-value prisoners to interrogate." They made their way through the station's damaged corridors, stepping over debris and avoiding sections where the hull had been breached. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red shadows, while the sound of distant explosions echoed through the superstructure like the beating of a massive heart. Other defenders were moving through the station with the same purpose, forming impromptu squads and taking up defensive positions near critical areas. Marcus recognized most of them from the instructor roster, veteran soldiers who had been assigned to teaching duties after their own combat injuries or age had made them unsuitable for frontline service. Looking at them now, Marcus realized how foolish that assessment had been. These men and women represented thousands of years of combined combat experience. They might not be as fast or as strong as younger soldiers, but they possessed something that no amount of training could replace: the hard-won wisdom of survivors. The first boarding craft struck the station's docking bay with the sound of tearing metal. Through the security cameras, Marcus could see armored figures pouring from the alien vessel like a flood of death. But these weren't the familiar Zephyrian shock troops or hegemony assault soldiers he had faced before. These new enemies moved wrong. They were humanoid in general shape, but seemed to flow rather than walk, their movements too smooth and coordinated. Their armor appeared to be the same adaptive material as the fighter craft, shifting and rippling as it adjusted to the station's environment. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to communicate without using any detectable radio frequencies, moving in perfect coordination as if controlled by a single mind. "What the hell are those things?" Morrison asked, his voice tight with fear. Marcus studied the security feed, trying to understand what they were facing. The aliens' tactics were unlike anything in human military databases. They moved with the fluid coordination of a school of fish or a flock of birds, each individual responding instantly to changes in the group's behavior. "New species," he said finally, "something the hegemony picked up recently, and they're specifically designed for close-quarters combat." The defenders had set up a series of choke points throughout the station, using furniture and equipment to create firing positions and barriers. Marcus chose a position near the main corridor leading from the docking bay, where he would have clear sight lines, but multiple escape routes if the situation became untenable. The waiting was the hardest part. Through the security cameras, they could watch the alien boarding party moving systematically through the outer sections of the station. They didn't seem interested in killing everyone they encountered. Instead, they were capturing human personnel, using some kind of neural disruption weapons that left their targets unconscious but alive. They want prisoners, Marcus realized. Information. They're not here to destroy the station. They're here to learn everything we know about human sniper tactics and training. The implications were terrifying. If the enemy could analyze human marksman techniques and develop effective countermeasures, one of humanity's few battlefield advantages will be neutralized. The war was already going badly for human forces. Losing their edge in long-range precision combat could spell the end of organized resistance. The first alien rounded the corner at exactly 1,347 hours, its form seeming to flow around the bend like liquid metal given purpose. Marcus had his rifle trained on the intersection, but the creature's movement was so unexpected that his first shot went wide, the beam passing through empty space where any normal opponent would have been. The alien didn't even pause. It simply adjusted its path with impossible grace and continued advancing. Its weapon, some kind of energy projector that seemed to be grown rather than manufactured, already charging for a return shot. Marcus dove to one side as a pulse of purple energy destroyed the cover where he had been hiding. The alien's accuracy was disturbing, but its weapon appeared to have a significant charging time between shots. That was something he could work with. Rolling to a new position, Marcus lined up his second shot more carefully. Instead of trying to predict the alien's movement, he aimed for where it had to go. The creature was moving toward Morrison's position with fluid purpose, but the corridor's layout limited its possible paths. The shot took the alien's center mass just as it began to shift direction. The creature's adaptive armor flared with absorbed energy, but the old M2047's beam was powerful enough to overwhelm its defensive capabilities. The alien collapsed in a spray of yellowish fluid that hissed and bubbled as it contacted the metal floor. "They can be killed," Morrison said with obvious relief. But more aliens were already flowing into the corridor, their movements even more coordinated than before. Marcus realized with growing horror that they had learned from their companion's death, adjusting their tactics in real time to account for human marksmanship capabilities. The next wave moved in a complex pattern that made targeting individual creatures nearly impossible. They seemed to phase in and out of cover with supernatural timing, always ensuring that multiple bodies were moving to obscure any clean shot. Marcus managed to drop one more with a lucky hit, but the others continued advancing with relentless purpose. "Fall back," he ordered, already moving toward their secondary position. "We can't hold here." As they retreated through the station's twisting corridors, Marcus began to understand the true scope of their situation. The enemy wasn't just more advanced than human forces. They were fundamentally different. These new aliens operated on principles that human military doctrine had never encountered, with capabilities that seemed to violate basic laws of physics. But they also had weaknesses. The neural disruption weapons they used for capturing prisoners had limited range and required direct line of sight. Their adaptive armor, while highly effective against energy weapons, seemed vulnerable to physical impacts. Most importantly, their fluid coordination, while making them incredibly effective as a group, might make them vulnerable to tactics that disrupted their communication. The thought sparked an idea that was either brilliant or suicidal. "Morrison," he said as they took up position near the station's central communications array, "how good are you with demolitions?" "Basic training only, sir." "Why?" Marcus was already examining the massive communications equipment that formed the heart of the station's information systems. These aliens coordinate through some kind of quantum entanglement field. That's why our sensors can't detect their communications. But quantum fields are delicate. A strong enough electromagnetic pulse might disrupt their coordination. "You want to blow up our own communications array?" "I want to turn it into the biggest electromagnetic bomb this side of a nuclear weapon," Marcus corrected. "If we can disrupt their coordination, even for a few minutes, we might be able to even the odds." It was a desperate plan with a low probability of success, but as the sounds of alien movement echoed through the corridors around them, Marcus realized it might be their only chance. The station was lost, but if they could provide intelligence about these new enemies and their capabilities, the data might save human lives elsewhere in the war. He began working on the communications array's power couplings, using knowledge gained from years of field modifications to combat equipment. The goal was to create a cascade failure that would release all the stored energy in the station's communication systems at once, hopefully generating an electromagnetic pulse strong enough to disrupt quantum fields within several hundred meters. "Sir," Morrison's voice was tight with strain. "Motion sensors are showing massive movement. They're converging on our position. Marcus didn't look up from his work. His hands moved with steady precision despite the pain in his shoulder, years of experience guiding him through the complex modifications required. How long do we have? Maybe 3 minutes. I need 5. Outside their position, the sounds of approaching aliens grew louder. The creatures were no longer trying to be stealthy. They knew exactly where their quarry was hiding, and they were moving in for the final capture. Through the security monitors, Marcus could see dozens of the flowing forms advancing through multiple corridors, their coordination so perfect it looked like a choreographed dance. But Marcus Chun had spent 12 years learning to make impossible shots under impossible circumstances. As he worked to turn the station's own systems into a weapon, he found himself thinking about all the times he had been dismissed, underestimated, or written off as past his prime. The aliens were about to learn what humans did when they had nothing left to lose. The electromagnetic pulse erupted through Ceres Station like a thunderclap made of pure energy. Emergency lighting failed throughout entire sections of the base as the massive surge overwhelmed protective circuits and sent cascading failures through every electronic system within range. For exactly 47 seconds, the most advanced military training facility in human space was reduced to nothing more than a hollow metal shell drifting in the void. But those 47 seconds changed everything. Marcus felt the pulse as a physical sensation, like static electricity crawling across his skin. The modified communications array had exploded in a shower of sparks and molten metal, taking with it every advanced piece of technology in the immediate area. His rifle's electronic components were fried, reducing the sophisticated M-2047 to little more than an expensive club. More importantly, the aliens had stopped moving. Through the darkened corridors, Marcus could hear sounds he had never expected from the fluid, coordinated creatures they had been fighting. Confusion, disorientation, what sounded almost like panic as individual aliens suddenly found themselves cut off from whatever collective intelligence had been guiding their actions. It worked, Morrison whispered, staring at his own dead rifle in amazement. They're not coordinating anymore. Marcus was already moving, pulling out his backup weapon, a simple kinetic pistol that relied on chemical propellants and mechanical firing mechanisms. It was primitive compared to modern energy weapons, but it would function even in the electromagnetic dead zone they had created. Grab your sidearm, ordered Morrison. We have maybe 10 minutes before their quantum field restabilizes or they bring in equipment to restore coordination. We need to move now. They crept through the station's darkened corridors, guided by emergency chemical lighting that was too simple to be affected by the electromagnetic pulse. The familiar passages had been transformed into an alien maze of shadows and strange sounds. Emergency bulkheads had sealed automatically when the power failed, creating new paths through maintenance shafts and service tunnels that Marcus had to navigate from memory. But the most significant change was the aliens themselves. The creatures that had moved through the station like a living flood were now stumbling around in obvious confusion. Without their collective coordination, they seemed almost pathetic, individual organisms trying to complete a mission they no longer fully understood. Marcus watched one alien walk directly into a wall, its adaptive armor failing to compensate for the obstacle because its quantum-linked awareness of the environment had been severed. They're like ants, Morrison observed quietly as they watched another alien wandering in circles near a junction. Individually intelligent, but the colony mind is what made them dangerous. It was an astute observation from the young recruit. Marcus filed the information away as they continued through the station, avoiding the confused aliens when possible and dealing with them quietly when necessary. The kinetic pistol was effective against their armor when they weren't expecting attacks, and without their collective awareness, they couldn't warn each other about human movements. But Marcus knew their advantage was temporary. Already, he could see signs that the aliens were beginning to adapt to their situation. Small groups were starting to coordinate through visual signals and primitive vocalizations. It was clumsy compared to their quantum-linked perfection, but it suggested that their underlying intelligence hadn't been damaged, only disrupted. They needed to reach the station's communication array in the command center, assuming it had survived the electromagnetic pulse. If they could get a message out to the approaching human fleet, intelligence about these new aliens might help turn the tide of the broader battle. The route to the command center took them through the main training facility, where rows of simulation pods sat dark and silent in the emergency lighting. Marcus felt a strange sadness looking at the equipment that had been used to train humanity's best marksmen. All of that knowledge and experience might die here if they couldn't escape to share what they had learned. "Sir," Morrison whispered, pointing toward the far end of the training bay. Movement! A group of 6 aliens had gathered near the entrance to the command center. Unlike the confused individuals they had encountered elsewhere, these creatures seemed to have partially restored their coordination. They moved with purpose, their adaptive armor shifting to match the shadows as they established a defensive perimeter. Marcus studied their positions through the scope of his backup rifle, which had been far enough from the communications array to survive the electromagnetic pulse with minimal damage. The aliens had chosen their positions well, covering all approaches to the command center with overlapping fields of fire. But they were thinking like humans now, using tactics based on individual initiative rather than collective awareness. That gave Marcus an advantage he could exploit. "Stay here," he told Morrison. "Give me exactly 30 seconds, then create a distraction at the main entrance. Noise, movement, anything to draw their attention. What are you going to do?" "Something stupid that might just work." Marcus made his way around the perimeter of the training bay, using the simulation pods and equipment as cover. His shoulder ached constantly, and his right arm trembled with fatigue, but years of combat experience guided him through a path that would have been impossible for a younger, less experienced soldier to navigate. The aliens were focused on the obvious approaches to their position, watching for frontal assaults and flanking maneuvers that followed conventional military doctrine. They weren't prepared for someone who had spent 12 years learning to appear where enemies least expected. Marcus climbed. The training bay ceiling was a maze of support beams, ventilation ducts, and power conduits that provided perfect cover for someone willing to risk a 30-foot drop onto an unforgiving metal floor. His injured arm protested every movement, but Marcus forced himself upward, drawing on reserves of determination he hadn't known he still possessed. Below, the aliens maintained their watch, their attention focused outward rather than up. Their adaptive armor was optimized for ground-level threats, creating camouflage patterns that blended with the horizontal surfaces while leaving them vulnerable to observation from above. Morrison's distraction came right on schedule. The crash of equipment being knocked over echoed through the bay as the young recruit made as much noise as possible near the main entrance. The aliens responded exactly as Marcus had hoped, shifting their positions to address the apparent threat and exposing themselves to attack from their unguarded flank. Marcus dropped from the ceiling support beam directly onto the lead alien, his combat knife finding the creature's neck joint before its armor could adapt. Yellow fluid sprayed across the floor as the alien collapsed, its death throes creating enough chaos to mask Marcus's landing. The other aliens spun toward him, their weapons charging with distinctive whining sounds. But Marcus was already rolling toward cover behind one of the simulation pods, his rifle coming up as muscle memory overrode conscious thought. The first shot took down the alien to his left, the beam punching through armor that hadn't had time to adjust to the new threat angle. The second shot missed as its target dove behind cover, but the third found its mark as the creature tried to flank him. 3 down, 3 remaining. But the survivors had learned from their companions' deaths, spreading out, and using the training equipment for cover in ways that made clean shots nearly impossible. Marcus found himself pinned behind the simulation pod as energy beams scorched the metal around him. Morrison's rifle began firing from the main entrance, his shots wild but accurate enough to force the aliens to divide their attention. The young recruit had grown considerably during their fight through the station, his earlier cockiness replaced by steady determination and genuine skill. But They were still outnumbered, and the aliens were adapting to human tactics faster than Marcus had expected. One of the creatures was working its way around behind his position, while the others maintained suppressing fire. In another minute, he would be caught in a crossfire that no amount of skill could overcome. Marcus made a decision that would have been impossible 6 months earlier, when his pride and self-doubt had made him question every choice. He stopped thinking about what he couldn't do and focused entirely on what he could. Rising from cover, he put himself directly in the line of fire from 2 alien weapons. Energy beams seared past him as he acquired his target, the alien trying to flank his position. The shot was impossible by any reasonable standard, a moving target at an awkward angle while under direct fire, taken with a rifle that wasn't properly zeroed and an arm that couldn't hold steady. Marcus made it anyway. The alien pitched backward as the beam took its center mass, its weapons spinning away across the floor. The remaining 2 aliens, shocked by the seemingly suicidal maneuver, hesitated for just an instant before resuming fire. That instant was enough. Morrison's next shot caught one of them in the shoulder, spinning it around and exposing its flank to Marcus's follow-up. The last alien managed to get off 2 more shots before Marcus's final beam found its mark, leaving the training bay filled with smoke and the acidic smell of alien blood. Jesus Christ, Morrison breathed, looking at the carnage around them. How did you do that? You were completely exposed. They had you dead to rights. Marcus lowered his rifle, his right arm finally giving out completely. Sometimes the only way out is through. They expected me to stay in cover, to fight defensively. They weren't prepared for someone desperate enough to ignore his own safety. But even as he said it, Marcus knew the real reason for his success. For months, he had been fighting against his limitations, trying to overcome his injury through sheer force of will. Only when he had stopped fighting himself and started working with what remained had he truly become dangerous again. They made their way into the command center, where banks of equipment hummed quietly in the darkness. Most of the advanced systems had been fried by the electromagnetic pulse, but the emergency communication array was built to older, more robust standards. Marcus began working on the communication system, while Morrison kept watch. The process was complicated by his injured arm and the primitive nature of the backup equipment, but gradually he managed to establish a connection with the approaching human fleet. This is Ghost Shot calling any Terran forces. He broadcast on the emergency frequency. Ceres Station has been overrun by new enemy forces, uploading tactical data on alien capabilities and weaknesses. The response came back immediately, crackling through damaged speakers. Ghost Shot, this is Admiral Richardson commanding the 3rd Fleet. We're 3 hours out. Can you hold position? Marcus looked around the darkened command center, at the smoke rising from alien bodies and the sparks still falling from damaged equipment. Outside, the hegemony fleet was still maintaining its position, probably wondering why their boarding forces had stopped reporting in. Negative, Admiral. Station is compromised and defensive systems are offline. But we have intelligence on enemy capabilities that could change the war. Transmit everything you have. We'll make sure it reaches the right people. As Marcus uploaded the tactical data they had gathered, including detailed sensor readings of the new aliens and analysis of their quantum coordination systems, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months: the satisfaction of a mission accomplished. But their work wasn't finished yet. The electromagnetic pulse was beginning to fade, and already Marcus could see lights coming back online in distant sections of the station. The aliens would soon restore their quantum coordination and resume their systematic capture of human personnel. "Sir," Morrison said from his position near the entrance, picking up movement throughout the station. "I think they're getting organized again." Marcus finished the data transmission and began working on a different system entirely. If they couldn't hold the station, they could at least deny it to the enemy. The fusion reactors that powered Ceres Station could be overloaded to create an explosion that would not only destroy the facility, but take a significant portion of the hegemony fleet with it. It was a one-way ticket, but it would ensure that the aliens learned nothing from their capture of humanity's premier training facility. As he worked on the reactor controls, Marcus realized that for the first time in months, he felt truly useful again. Not as a broken-down veteran shuffled off to meaningless duties, but as a soldier doing what soldiers do, protecting humanity at any cost. The reactor overload sequence would take 20 minutes to reach critical mass. That was enough time to get the remaining station personnel to the emergency escape pods, but not enough for Marcus and Morrison to reach safety themselves. Someone had to stay behind to ensure the sequence completed and to deal with any aliens who might try to stop it. "Morrison," he said quietly, "I need you to get to escape pod 7 and evacuate with the other survivors." "Sir, I'm not leaving you here alone." Marcus smiled, remembering his own stubborn determination at that age. "That's an order, recruit. Someone needs to make sure the tactical data reaches the training command. You've seen these aliens in action. You understand their capabilities better than anyone." "What about you?" Marcus checked his rifle's power cell and made sure his sidearm was loaded. Through the command center's windows, he could see alien forms moving through the station's corridors with renewed purpose. Their quantum coordination was coming back online, and they would soon converge on the command center with overwhelming force. "I'm going to buy time for everyone to escape," he said, "and make sure these bastards learn that dismissing a wounded human was their deadliest mistake." As Morrison reluctantly headed for the escape pods, Marcus settled into a defensive position overlooking the main corridor to the command center. His rifle was fully charged, his ammunition was sufficient, and for the first time since his injury, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The aliens were coming, and Ghost Shot was ready for them. The reactor countdown showed 18 minutes and 43 seconds when the first alien rounded the corner into Marcus's sightline. The creature moved with the fluid grace that had returned as their quantum coordination systems came back online. But something was different now. There was caution in its movement, a wariness that hadn't been present during their initial assault. They had learned to fear him. Marcus's first shot took the alien center mass before it could react, the beam punching through adaptive armor that flickered and failed under the precision strike. The creature collapsed in a spray of yellow fluid, but Marcus was already acquiring his next target. The aliens had developed new tactics since their coordination returned, and they were no longer advancing in the coordinated waves that had proven so effective earlier. Instead, they were treating him like what he had always been, a sniper. A single human who could kill at range with devastating precision. The second alien tried to use hit and run tactics, exposing itself for just an instant before ducking back behind cover. But Marcus had been fighting enemies who understood human sniping techniques for over a decade. He knew how to lead a target, how to predict movement patterns, and, most importantly, how to wait for the perfect shot. When the alien emerged for its attack run, Marcus was ready. The beam caught it mid-stride, the creature's own momentum carrying it forward even as its nervous system shut down. It crashed into the wall with a wet thud, leaving a streak of alien blood across the metal surface. Through the station's communication system, Marcus could hear the sounds of evacuation, escape pods launching in carefully timed sequences as the remaining human personnel fled the doomed facility. Morrison's voice came through the command channel, reporting successful launches and providing updates on the reactor overload sequence. "Ghost Shot, this is Morrison. All pods away except emergency reserves. Reactor overload at 17 minutes and counting. Are you sure you can't make it to an escape pod?" Marcus checked his ammunition counter and studied the tactical displays showing alien movement throughout the station. More creatures were converging on the command center, their numbers growing as they pulled forces from other areas of the facility. They understood now that the reactor overload was the real threat, and they were preparing for a final assault to stop it. "Negative," he responded. "Too many hostiles between here and the nearest pod. Besides, someone needs to make sure this sequence completes." What he didn't mention was that he no longer wanted to leave. For the first time since his injury, Marcus felt like he was making a difference. Every alien he killed here, was one that wouldn't be available to attack human colonies elsewhere. Every minute he held the command center was another minute for the evacuation to succeed and the tactical data to reach the human fleet. The third alien tried a different approach, using some kind of personal cloaking device that bent light around its form. Marcus could see the subtle distortion moving through the corridor, but the creature's confidence in its stealth technology made it careless. It moved in a straight line toward his position, apparently believing itself invisible. Marcus waited until the distortion was less than 50 meters away, then put a beam directly through its center mass. The creature's cloaking field collapsed as it died, revealing the shocked expression on its alien features. Even in death, it seemed surprised that a mere human had detected its approach. But the real assault was just beginning. The lights in the corridor suddenly went dark as the aliens cut power to the section. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red shadows, while alien forms began moving through the darkness with deadly purpose. Marcus could see them on his thermal scope, dozens of creatures flowing through the station's corridors like a tide of living metal. They had stopped underestimating him. The first wave came from 3 directions simultaneously, forcing Marcus to constantly shift positions to maintain clear sight lines. His rifle's beam cut through the darkness like a sword of light, each shot precisely placed to maximize damage while conserving ammunition. But there were too many targets, and they were learning from each death. An alien that tried to rush his position got a beam through its torso. Another that attempted to flank him took a shot to the head that left its adaptive armor sparking and failing. A third managed to get close enough to return fire before Marcus's countershot silenced its weapon forever. But for every alien that fell, 2 more took its place. Marcus found himself falling back deeper into the command center, using the computer banks and control stations as cover while aliens pressed in from multiple directions. His right arm was screaming in pain now, the old injury aggravated by the constant strain of maintaining his rifle. But his left hand had grown stronger over months of compensation, and his shots remained precise even under the enormous pressure. The reactor countdown showed 12 minutes when the aliens changed tactics again. Instead of trying to overwhelm him with numbers, they began a systematic demolition of the command center itself. Energy weapons targeted the reactor control systems, tried to interrupt the overload sequence that would deny them their prize. Other aliens focused on the communication equipment, attempting to cut off any remaining contact with human forces. Marcus realized he was no longer just defending himself. He was defending the equipment that would ensure the aliens gained nothing from their attack on Ceres Station. Every control panel they destroyed was a victory for humanity. Every system they failed to capture was intelligence they couldn't use against human forces. He began targeting their demolition efforts specifically, prioritizing shots that would protect the most critical systems. An alien aiming for the main reactor controls took a beam between its eyes. Another attempting to access the personnel database found itself missing most of its torso. But Marcus couldn't be everywhere at once, and the aliens were wearing him down through sheer persistence. His ammunition was running low, his rifle's power cell was nearly drained, and his injured arm was beginning to affect his accuracy despite months of adaptation training. The reactor countdown showed 8 minutes when everything changed. A new sound echoed through the station's corridors, the distinctive whine of human energy weapons firing at full power. Marcus's tactical display lit up with friendly contacts as a squad of armored figures fought their way through the alien-infested passages toward the command center. Ghost shot, this is Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Hayes, 15 Special Operations, came a transmission on his command frequency. We're coming to get you out of there. Marcus felt a surge of disbelief. Colonel, how did you get aboard? The station is surrounded by enemy ships. Admiral Richardson launched a high-speed insertion mission when he received your tactical data. Turns out your intelligence about their quantum coordination was exactly what we needed to develop countermeasures. We've got new equipment that can disrupt their collective awareness. Through the command center's windows, Marcus could see the battle raging in the corridors below. Human soldiers in advanced armor were fighting their way through waves of aliens, their weapons modified with the quantum disruption technology that had been developed from his transmitted data. The aliens' fluid coordination was breaking down again as their quantum fields were systematically jammed. But the rescue force was still minutes away, and the aliens in the command center weren't giving up. If anything, the arrival of human reinforcements made them more desperate to complete their mission. They began throwing themselves at Marcus's position with suicidal determination, accepting massive casualties in exchange for incremental advances. Marcus's rifle finally ran out of power as he killed the alien trying to access the reactor emergency shutdown. He drew his kinetic pistol and continued fighting, each shot carefully placed to maximize effect. But the primitive weapon couldn't match the range and power of his rifle, forcing him to let the aliens get dangerously close before engaging. A creature with distinctive purple markings on its armor managed to reach the main reactor console before Marcus could stop it. The alien's claws worked frantically at the control interface, trying to input commands that would halt the overload sequence. Marcus put 3 bullets into its torso, but the creature's determination kept it functioning long enough to begin the shutdown process. The reactor countdown began to slow, the overload sequence fighting against emergency protocols that the alien had somehow activated. Marcus looked at his pistol's ammunition counter, 4 bullets left, and then at the half-dozen aliens still moving through the command center. The rescue force was close, but not close enough. In another minute, the aliens would either halt the reactor overload or capture him alive for interrogation. He made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of continuing to fight defensively, Marcus charged directly at the alien working on the reactor controls. The creature looked up in shock as the supposedly crippled human sniper launched himself across the command center, ignoring the energy beams that seared past him. Marcus crashed into the alien with his full body weight, driving it away from the reactor console. They tumbled to the floor together, the creature's claws raking across his chest while he pressed his pistol against its skull and pulled the trigger. The alien's adaptive armor absorbed most of the bullet's impact, but the point-blank range and kinetic energy were enough to crack its skull and send yellow fluid spraying across the floor. Marcus rolled away from the dying creature and fired his remaining 3 bullets into aliens that were converging on his position. But he had reached the reactor console, and that was what mattered. With his last functional hand, Marcus began inputting override commands that would lock out any external interference with the overload sequence. The reactor countdown resumed its inexorable progress toward critical mass, now showing 4 minutes and 37 seconds. The remaining aliens in the command center seemed to realize that their mission had failed. Instead of continuing to fight for control of the reactor, they began retreating toward their insertion point, apparently hoping to escape before the station's destruction. Marcus let them go. He had more important concerns. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes and her rescue team burst into the command center just as the reactor countdown reached 3 minutes. The Special Operations soldiers were impressive in their advanced armor and modified weapons, but Marcus could see the shock in their eyes as they took in the carnage around him. "Sir, we need to evacuate immediately," Hayes said, her medics already working to treat his injuries. "The nearest escape pod is 2 minutes away, but we'll need to move fast." Marcus shook his head weakly. "Reactors locked into overload. Can't be stopped now. You need to get your people clear. We're not leaving without you, sir." Orders from Admiral Richardson personally. Through the haze of pain and exhaustion, Marcus felt a warmth that had nothing to do with his injuries. For months, he had felt discarded, useless, a burden that the military tolerated out of obligation. But when humanity needed him most, when the situation was impossible and the stakes couldn't be higher, they had sent their best soldiers to bring him home. The evacuation to the escape pod was a blur of movement and adrenaline. Hayes's team moved with professional efficiency, carrying Marcus through corridors filled with alien bodies and the debris of their desperate battle. The reactor countdown continued its remorseless progression, now showing less than 2 minutes to critical mass. They reached the escape pod with 43 seconds to spare. As the small craft accelerated away from Ceres Station, Marcus watched through the porthole as the facility where he had spent the last months of his career grew smaller in the distance. In less than a minute, the reactor would achieve critical mass, and the station would become a brief new star, taking with it any aliens who hadn't managed to escape in time. But more importantly, it would take with it any intelligence the enemy might have gained about human sniper training and tactics. The knowledge and experience that could have been used against humanity would die with the station, ensuring that future human marksmen would retain their crucial battlefield advantage. "Sir," Lieutenant Colonel Hayes said as the escape pod's medical systems began more sophisticated treatment of his injuries, "I wanted you to know, the tactical data you transmitted has already been distributed throughout the fleet. Command estimates it will save thousands of lives in future engagements." Marcus closed his eyes and allowed himself a small smile. For the first time since his injury, he felt like his service had mattered. Being wounded hadn't made him useless. It had put him in exactly the right place at exactly the right time to make a difference when humanity needed it most. Behind them, Ceres Station erupted in a brilliant flash of nuclear fire that briefly outshone the local star. The explosion took with it 3 alien ships that had been too close to escape the blast radius, along with any hope the enemy had of using humanity's premier training facility against them. Ghost Shot had made his final stand, and it would be remembered long after the war was over. 6 months after the Battle of Ceres Station, Marcus Chin stood before the assembled leadership of the Terran Defense Corps in the Great Hall of New Geneva Station. The medal they were about to pin on his chest felt heavier than any weapon he had ever carried, not because of its physical weight, but because of what it represented. The Valor Cross was the highest military decoration humanity could bestow, reserved for actions that went far beyond the call of duty. Only 47 had ever been awarded in the entire history of human space colonization. Marcus was about to become the 48th recipient, and the first soldier to receive it for a battle he had fought while officially classified as unfit for combat duty. "The citation reads," announced Admiral Richardson, his voice carrying clearly through the packed ceremonial hall, "for extraordinary heroism in the face of overwhelming enemy forces, and for tactical innovation that fundamentally altered the course of the war against the Hegemony Alliance." Marcus stood as straight as his rebuilt shoulder would allow, his new prosthetic arm hidden beneath the dress uniform of the Terran Defense Corps. The cybernetic replacement was more capable than his original limb had ever been, with enhanced strength, perfect stability, and targeting assistance that made his shooting more precise than it had been even before his injury. But that wasn't what made him dangerous now. In the months following Ceres Station, the tactical intelligence Marcus had transmitted had revolutionized human understanding of the enemy. The new alien species, designated as collective entities by xenobiology teams, operated through quantum consciousness fields that allowed perfect coordination between individuals. But those same fields had exploitable weaknesses that human engineers had learned to target. Electromagnetic pulse weapons specifically designed to disrupt quantum fields were now standard equipment on human warships. Infantry units carried portable quantum jammers that could break alien coordination in localized areas. Most importantly, human tactics had evolved to exploit the aliens' dependence on collective awareness. The war wasn't won, but humanity was no longer losing. The intelligence gathered during the defense of Ceres Station, Admiral Richardson continued, has directly resulted in 17 major victories against hegemony forces, including the liberation of the Proxima Centauri system and the successful defense of the Sol orbital platforms. As the medal was pinned to his chest, Marcus thought about Morrison and the other recruits who had survived the battle. The young soldier had indeed become an excellent marksman, but, more importantly, he had become a teacher. The tactical knowledge gained at Ceres was being passed down to a new generation of snipers who understood that technology was a tool, not a replacement for skill, and determination. But the ceremony was just the beginning of Marcus's day. After the formal proceedings ended and he had shaken hands with more officers than he could count, Marcus made his way to the most important appointment on his schedule. The Adaptive Combat Training Center was New Geneva Station's equivalent of the facility that had been destroyed at Ceres. But this new school was different, designed from the ground up to incorporate everything humanity had learned about fighting the hegemony and their collective entity allies. Marcus's office overlooked the main training bay, where instructors worked with students using a combination of traditional marksmanship techniques and cutting-edge technology. The old division between smart and dumb weapons had been abandoned in favor of adaptive systems that enhanced human skill rather than replacing it. "Sir," Morrison knocked on the office doorframe, now wearing the insignia of a sergeant instructor. "Your 1400 briefing is ready to begin." Marcus nodded and followed his former student to the main briefing room, where 24 of the military's most promising junior officers waited for their introduction to advanced threat analysis. These were the soldiers who would command human forces in the next phase of the war, and they needed to understand not just how to fight the enemy, but how to think about fighting them. "Today we're going to discuss adaptive tactics." Marcus began, activating the holographic display that showed a three-dimensional model of Ceres Station during the battle. 6 months ago, our military doctrine was based on the assumption that superior technology would always defeat superior numbers. The collective entities proved that assumption wrong. He manipulated the display to show the fluid movement patterns of the alien boarding forces, their perfect coordination, and seemingly impossible maneuvers. Several of the junior officers shifted uncomfortably as they watched human defensive positions being overrun with surgical precision. The enemy's quantum coordination made them effectively immune to conventional tactics. Marcus continued. Every individual shared perfect information with every other individual. They could not be surprised, they could not be misdirected, and they could adapt to our responses faster than we could implement them. A young lieutenant raised her hand. "Sir, how did you develop countermeasures so quickly? The reports say you had less than an hour to analyze their capabilities." Marcus smiled, remembering his own eagerness at that age. "I didn't develop countermeasures, Lieutenant. I recognized weaknesses. The aliens' greatest strength, their perfect coordination, was also their greatest vulnerability. Systems that depend on quantum entanglement are inherently fragile when subjected to electromagnetic interference." He changed the display to show the electromagnetic pulse that had disrupted the aliens' coordination. But the real lesson isn't about quantum fields or electronic warfare. It's about adaptability. When our advanced systems failed, we fell back on basic principles. When our smart weapons couldn't target the enemy, we relied on fundamental marksmanship skills. Another officer, this one a major with combat experience in the Outer Rim, spoke up. "Sir, are you suggesting we should abandon our technological advantages?" "Not abandon them, Major, but not depend on them exclusively either. Technology fails. Equipment breaks. Power runs out. But human adaptability, creativity, and sheer bloody-minded determination, those are resources that never run dry." Marcus spent the next hour walking the officers through the tactical analysis of the Ceres battle, showing them how conventional wisdom had failed and unconventional thinking had prevailed. But, more importantly, he tried to convey the mindset that had allowed a wounded, supposedly unfit soldier to hold off an entire alien assault force. "The enemy dismissed me because I was injured," he concluded. "They assumed that reduced capability meant reduced threat. That was their mistake. A damaged weapon can still kill if it's in the right hands at the right time." After the briefing, Marcus returned to his office to find a priority message waiting on his secure terminal. The encryption codes identified it as coming from Admiral Richardson himself, marked with the highest classification level. The message was brief. "New intelligence indicates major hegemony offensive plan for Titan system. Request your immediate deployment as tactical advisor. Your experience with collective entity forces may be crucial." Marcus leaned back in his chair, feeling a familiar mixture of anticipation and dread. The Titan system contains some of humanity's most important industrial facilities, along with nearly 2 billion civilian colonists. If the hegemony was planning a major offensive there, it represented a serious escalation of the war. But it also represented an opportunity. The aliens had learned from their defeat at Ceres Station, developing new tactics and technologies to counter human countermeasures. Intelligence reports suggested they were deploying improved collective entities with hardened quantum fields that were resistant to electromagnetic interference. They had also begun using conventional forces more effectively, reducing their dependence on collective coordination. Marcus activated his communicator and sent a response to Admiral Richardson. Request granted. Will deploy with next available transport. As he began preparing for another combat deployment, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since that day in General Volkov's office when he had been declared unfit for duty. The military bureaucracy that had once seen him as a liability now recognized him as one of their most valuable assets, not despite his injury, but because of what he had learned from it. The prosthetic arm was better than his original in many ways, but it would never feel entirely natural. The chronic pain in his shoulder was managed, but never completely gone. He would always be a wounded soldier, carrying the scars of his service. But he was also living proof that human worth couldn't be measured in physical capabilities alone. Creativity, experience, determination, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for a cause greater than oneself. These were the qualities that made humanity dangerous to its enemies. 3 days later, Marcus stood on the bridge of the battlecruiser Defiant as it dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Titan system. The view through the main display was breathtaking and terrifying in equal measure. A massive hegemony fleet arranged in perfect battle formation, their ships darkening space like a metallic storm cloud. "Sir," reported the ship's tactical officer, "enemy fleet strength is approximately 200 vessels, including 12 of the new Dreadnought-class ships. They're maintaining position near Titan's moon system, apparently waiting for something." Admiral Richardson studied the tactical display with the expression of a man who had seen too many impossible situations. "Analysis, Chun. What are they waiting for?" Marcus examined the enemy formation through his enhanced vision systems, noting the precise spacing and coordination of the alien vessels. "Reinforcements, sir. This force is large enough to take the system, but not large enough to hold it against our response fleets. They're planning something bigger than a raid." "How much bigger?" Marcus highlighted several areas on the tactical display where the enemy formation showed gaps that could accommodate additional vessels. "At least double this size, possibly triple. They're planning to establish a permanent presence in the Titan system, turn it into a forward base for operations against Earth itself." The implications were staggering. Titan's industrial capacity could support a massive military buildup, while its position would allow the hegemony to threaten humanity's core systems. If this offensive succeeded, it could spell the end of effective human resistance. "Orders, sir?" asked Captain Williams, the Defiant's commanding officer. Admiral Richardson was quiet for a long moment, studying the tactical situation with the weight of command heavy on his shoulders. "We can't match their numbers, and our reinforcements are hours away. But we can't let them establish that foothold either." He turned to Marcus with a look that carried the weight of desperate decisions. "Chun, you fought these bastards up close. You understand how they think, how they adapt. If there's a way to stop this offensive with the forces we have, I need you to find it." Marcus studied the enemy formation, his enhanced analytical systems processing thousands of variables and tactical possibilities. The collective entities would be coordinating the entire fleet through their quantum consciousness fields, creating a level of precision and responsiveness that human forces couldn't match through conventional means. But conventional means weren't the only option available. "Sir," Marcus said slowly, an idea beginning to form in his mind, "I may have a solution, but it will require every ship in our task force, and The crew of at least one vessel won't be going home. Admiral Richardson met his gaze steadily. Explain. Marcus activated the tactical display's prediction systems, showing a simulation of his proposed attack plan. It was audacious to the point of madness, requiring perfect timing, absolute coordination, and a level of sacrifice that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. But it was also the only plan that had any chance of success against overwhelming odds. We're going to turn their greatest strength against them one more time, Marcus explained. Their quantum coordination makes them incredibly effective, but it also makes them vulnerable to a specific kind of attack. We just need to get close enough to deliver it. As the human fleet began moving into position for what would either be remembered as humanity's greatest victory or its final defeat, Marcus Chun felt the weight of his service medals against his chest. He had been dismissed as unfit for duty, written off as a broken soldier whose best years were behind him. The enemy was about to discover, once again, just how wrong that assessment had been. In the darkness between the worlds, Ghost Shot prepared to make his mark on history one more time.